Welcome, guys, to another episode of Free Thinkers Anonymous. We have Jeremy here along with another special guest. Hot off the press, man, we got Marvin here.
Hey, how's it going, guys?
Yeah, man. So, all three of us, something in common. We've all worked in the visual effects industry. That's what we do for a living. We work on these movies, TV shows, commercials, and we are the people who get almost no credit and are proud of it too, which
Uh-huh.
to our detriment, it's a gift and a curse working in the film industry. We have much to talk about. This might actually be a multi-segment piece as we go back and talk more about the visual effects industry. A lot of maybe clarifying some misclaimers that people have out there of how the stuff actually works. So we're going to shed some light. Hopefully you guys find it interesting, find it engaging, since this is what we went to school for. This is what we dedicate a lot of our time and energy towards is our craft. And we hope you guys will appreciate it. I think I'll hand it off to Jeremy right now.
Yeah, yeah, for sure. Um, so first off, just wanted to clarify what visual effects actually is, because every time I tell people I do VFX in the film industry, they're like, "Oh, that's so cool." And I just see this like glazed over look of I have no idea what that means, but it sounds really cool. So, the quick explanation of what it actually entails, because it's not at all what most people think. When we're working on visual effects, we are generally sitting at a computer. There's a very select few of us that get to be on set, generally a visual effects supervisor and maybe one or two assistants. But the vast majority of visual effects artists never see the actors, they never see the directors, producers, they never see anybody that's on set. They are handed footage after everything's been shot, after everything's been edited, and they cut it down into these individual clips that are then cut together to make each scene, and then each scene makes up the full movie. So we get those individual clips, and they're like, hey, can you add this effect to this footage that we shot? Occasionally, you'll get something that is full CGI, which I'll explain what that means in just a second. But then you're going to be integrating different CGI elements. You'll be kind of plussing it, if you will. You'll be making it look a little bit nicer than it comes straight out of the computer when they're rendering out digital elements. Yeah, now is a good time to get into visual effects as a whole. So there's a bunch of different terms. Some are used interchangeably by people that don't really know much about the film industry. That's special effects, visual effects, 3D, and CGI. And they all mean slightly different things. Some of them have multiple meanings, so it gets a little bit confusing. So let's just lay it out real simply. Special effects is what is done on set with what's called practical or like real life effects. So if you have a blood splatter, if there's somebody on set with like a little pill capsule or something that explodes, that blood splatter is special effects. If somebody actually has a fire on set, that's special effects. If somebody causes an explosion on set, that's actually special effects. Visual effects is everything that's done in post production. So after production, when everything's already been shot. So we get the footage, and either we are taking stuff that has been shot separately and integrating that into stuff that did not happen on set, or we are taking different things that were shot on set, combining those together, or we're modifying things that were shot on set, or we're adding fully computer created elements into what was actually shot on set. So visual effects covers all of that stuff. Anything that's added after. So within visual effects, we have CGI, which is computer generated imagery. That's what that stands for. Computer generated imagery just means it's something that was created by a computer. It wasn't shot with a camera. So occasionally we'll have a plate when you have footage from somewhere, or if you have a digital element. So we get a live action plate, something that they shot on set, that is going to be integrated with a fully digital element. So Say we're given a plate, there's supposed to be an explosion. Well, they didn't want to shoot a video of that explosion actually happening. So they had a 3D animation artist or simulation artist, depending on how you want to call it, that created that explosion on a computer, all simulations to create the way that that looked. And then we take that fully digital element that never actually happened in real life, integrate it with something that did happen in real life. So that's the compositing aspect of CGI. CGI is also like Disney movies, where it's fully animated 3D characters. DreamWorks, Pixar, those are all fully CGI 3D animation movies. Now, 3D can be 3D animation, it can also be 3D stereography. So, stereography is like where you put on the glasses when you're at the movie theater and it pops out of the screen. That's 3D stereo or stereography. 3D animation is like Disney movies. Wherever you're watching it, you're watching 3D animation. So, because of that, the terms get a little bit confused because 3D animation is basically CGI. 3D could mean 3D animation or 3D stereography. Visual effects covers all of it. And then you have compositing, which is the role of taking all of those different elements and combining them together. And then even within CGI, you have each stage of the process. You have each stage of the process where you can like create the object, you can create kind of the bones of the object and how it moves, you create the textures of the object, you light the object, you move the object called animation. And each of those things have their own speciality that some artists specialize in just doing that individual type of task for that part of the CGI pipeline. For me, Mike, and Marvin, we are all visual effects artists, generally compositors. So we are doing all of the post production stuff where we integrate things that were either shot on set, fully digitally created, or modifying something that was shot on set. Then when the movie comes out, there's probably a 1 in 20 chance that our name is actually in the credits for any work that we've done, even if we've been working on it for months and months and months, spending many, many hours every single day working on it. It's a fairly thankless job, but it is built on problem solving and being an artist that also has a more technical mind. And the really cool thing is that you get to create things that could never happen in real life. I think that's kind of the thing that got me into visual effects, making something that's completely awe-inspiring that could never happen in reality. That's really what pulled me into the visual effects industry. Also, there's a fantasy series that I read for many, many years, starting back in the early 2000s, called The Wheel of Time. And just visually imagining the way that that story would come to life on the small screen, it got me so excited that that's a big part of why I ended up joining the film industry, which for anybody who's listening that has watched the Wheel of Time TV show,
Uh-oh.
um, it's a very sad disappointment for what I had envisioned for what the story actually is. The show is nowhere near that, but moving on. Um, the other really cool thing with visual effects is that got me excited to be in it in the first place is the idea that you can use visual elements to add to a story with every single shot. Because with a lot of films, like indie films in particular, where they have the script and they generally have an idea of how they want to shoot the scene, but then they show up on set and they set up the lights, they set up the cameras, and they just shoot the scene. And whatever happens to have the best take is the best take that they use from whatever camera angle works. There's not much of a plan as far as how one shot moves into the next shot. There's not much of a plan of how different parts of things are shot. Different camera angles can kind of portray different meanings. And one thing that I noticed, Marvin, Mike, and I, we didn't start in the stereo conversion industry, but we were all in the stereo conversion industry for a while, doing that 3D conversion where you put on the glasses, pops out of the screen. And that was something I learned very quickly that you could do with 3D conversion is you could, if there was a chase scene, you could make it feel like things were closer together, make it feel more intense. If someone was lonely, you could really push the 3D so it felt like there was nothing around them, even if there were things closer in space. There's a lot of little nuanced things that you can do that aren't necessarily accurate to reality, but make the story so much more interesting. And that's something that we do as visual effects artists as well, where the shots that we work on tend to be much more planned out. And because of that, we can use the effects that we're creating to push the story even further with every single detail on every single shot. So that was something that always got me really excited when I started working in the VFX industry. But Mike, how about you? What got you into VFX?
Well, Jeremy, I'm glad you asked. I always liked movies growing up. I think all of us loved animated cartoons. And I think when 3D animation was coming up, we watched something like Beast Wars and we thought that was super cool. Or,
Hmm.
we watched movies like, who hasn't seen Star Wars? And that's a whole thing too of how Star Wars has shaped and revitalized the VFX industry, which we could do something else on in the future because that's a full-length segment on how influential ILM is for why we do what we do today.
Oh, absolutely.
But yeah, man, the thing that really triggered me and just had a huge social impact was when The Matrix dropped. That came out, and I thought these visuals are crazy. I'm a kid, I'm growing up. My dad was a huge Bruce Lee fan, so I was watching martial arts movies. So I'm like, all right, cool. We got that segment where Neo's learning kung fu on the spot, and then you had these crazy sci-fi elements. I could recognize all the little the Ghost in the Shell and other little elements that they put into that film. And I always liked old black and white movies, like film noir stuff. So I saw that influence in the movie too. So if you can't tell, I could do a whole segment on the Matrix as well, in terms of all the meaning, all the symbolism, and just how that just sparked a revolution in its sense. When that movie came out, we all knew that was a huge impact. Keanu Reeves, who in my mind was always goated,
Hmm.
but in that movie, he did become the one. If he talked about guy realizing that there's something greater about himself and stepping up, you refer to that as being the one. That was a huge cultural thing for like a decade. But the biggest impact that the Matrix had with our industry is that everyone wanted to use way more visual effects to highlight action scenes and action sequences. And that became a huge boom. But for me, the visuals can really create, as you mentioned, worlds that we haven't seen before and really kind of put you in a space that you never thought was possible. So watching that movie, it was checking so many
Hmm.
boxes and doing so many things where I'm like, wow, I want to be a part of that. I think that's dope. Yeah, getting into VFX that, okay, we're going into a more space
Hmm.
where I think stories are going to be way more interesting, way more compelling. There's now a current shift where now we're reevaluating, well, what do people really want to see in the theater?
Hmm.
And every once in a while, you got something like an Avatar where people are again, wow, the technology, wow, the storytelling. This is something that has people going, but you only get one of those here and there. But the goal was always to be part of something like that. That's why I got into VFX.
Yeah.
And now we got the most important, I think the most interesting one. We got why did Marvin get into VFX?
Yeah, I'm curious about this one.
Me, yeah, I don't even know how I got into it. No, no, no. I mean, it's kind of a similar stories. I think with a lot of people. Mike mentioned Beast Wars. I remember that as a kid. I was like, this is amazing. Like, them transforming, just everything, right? Star Wars, Jurassic Park was one. I love
Mhm.
dinosaurs. Like just the visuals of all that. Of course, The Matrix. I think that's probably on a lot of people's list,
Mhm.
groundbreaking work and just a lot of things that they did. Obviously, like growing up, I'd liked watching like behind the scenes things on like movies and stuff like that. And it wasn't as much information as it is now, where they just have a lot more behind the scenes of the visual effects, how they set things up, what they're doing. Like, but I think at the time when it was like a little bit, couple snippets here and there, I always found that fascinating. I was like, wow, like that's what it was before. And that kind of just like really got me intrigued in it. And I love watching movies. So yeah.
So I've actually noticed the opposite to be the case. It seems to me there used to be really in-depth looks at Lord of the Rings, for instance, when they came out with their behind the scenes, like they showed you how they had two different scale rooms for Bilbo's house and how they did the forced perspective. And like they really got into the nitty-gritty of how they pulled off the visual effects for a lot of different things. Nowadays, even the Fast and the Furious movies, like you try to go into the visual effect behind the scenes, and they'll be like, "Oh, we shot it all practically."
I mean, yeah, I mean that's a good point. I think with news out there and stuff kind of going more with practical effects and not, kind of shadowing over the visual effects aspect of it. I can see that being a thing. At least like from what I remember growing up, I think I saw less. Maybe I just wasn't looking in the right places at the time. But I think there has been a shift in that. But also I think it depends on the movie or TV show.
That's definitely
And
true.
then Smallville was like a show for me. They had a lot of for an
Mm.
episodic TV show like that to have the visual effects that they had. I thought was pretty crazy as well. And I think that kind of paved the way to a lot of TV series, superhero stuff now. But I always just enjoy the people would say the movie magic of just how the final product comes out to like where it started, which on top of like the visual effects, just everyone behind the film industry, camera work, lights, set design, just everything, all the hard work that everyone puts in just for that final product that you just watch and you're like, yeah, like that was some good stuff right there.
Hmm. Yeah. No, it's always great when you see a movie that really pushes the limits. And I mean, I love that both of you guys brought up The Matrix because like that on my list too, for sure. That was one of the wow, you can really do anything with visual effects. But looking back at it, it's amazing how few visual effects are used in that film. There's like a lot of very practical sets. There's a lot of bullet time of Neo falling was done with an array of cameras. But one of the really cool things with that film is that they did use practical effects balanced with visual effects. And then on top of that, they created limitations for it. When Neo started to realize he was the one, he didn't immediately win. It wasn't until he fully realized that he was the one that he got up, just flew right into Agent Smith, blew him up, and everybody just ran. They were like, we don't have a chance against this guy. But even then, it wasn't like he could just change all of the Matrix. It was he could take on individual agents. He still existed in an individual space. He couldn't teleport around. So there were still limitations even within the Matrix for how far he could push things, even through Matrix 2 and 3, which were nowhere near the quality of the original. But I think that's the really cool thing with what we get to do with film is that we get to push the limits, but also set new limits as we do that so that it doesn't feel unearned. And the reason why it feels so earned is because of all the work that goes into it from all the different departments, as you were saying. I love how the camera team and the producers and the directors and the cast and crew, everybody together, then handing everything off to the visual effects team saying, this is our vision, make it do this, and then even make it better. And we get to do that. That's so cool to me that we're kind of entrusted in that space to take something that looked good, we get to make it look even better, even cooler.
Yeah, I think that's such a huge part in the name, right? We're visual effects artists.
Mm-hmm.
Even though we sit in front of a computer and we sometimes just do what we're told because there has to be a lot of structure and a lot of guidance in terms of what the end result is supposed to be. But at the end of the day, everyone puts a lot of passion and hard work and
Mm-hmm.
everyone's very proud of what they do. Segues into the next topic, what it is actually like to work in the visual effects industry.
Yeah.
All right, I think we're going to end it there for this week. Just want to thank Jeremy and Marvin for joining us and everybody for listening. Please continue to tune in and as we go even further into the visual effects industry.